So does everybody know Beyonce released a new album back in December this past year? All right, cool. Obviously, I had that up. Now, but does anybody know who was number one in iTunes just 5 days later? Any guesses? No, it wasn't Weird Al. So unless you guessed it was an unsigned band by the name of We the Kings, you were definitely wrong. Now, how does an unsigned band without any paid media support get to be number one in iTunes worldwide? Well, they had a bit of a secret weapon in that their bass player is Charles Trippy. For those of you who aren't familiar with Charles, he's a YouTuber. He's got over 1.4 million subscribers. He's been on the platform almost since the beginning for like 8 years. And he actually set the Guinness Book of World Records for daily consecutive video blogs. So he's been uploading videos of his life every single day for, I think, 6 years now. And it was his viewership that We the Kings tapped into to drive enough people over to iTunes and purchase their album and knock Beyonce off the charts. And they managed to stay there for 2 whole days. And here's a quick example of one of the many incentives he provided his fans to go purchase the album. Is there audio? I can ad-lib, if not. All right, well, I'll paraphrase, but basically one of the incentives was, and they did a lot of things, he's telling everybody, hey, go buy the album. If I hit number 3, I'll get the title of the album tattooed across my chest, and then he makes a joke about maybe he should get a tramp stamp instead. So this is what's possible, though, with the right influencers. You can be number one in iTunes worldwide. You can knock out the biggest pop star on the planet. Or if you're a TV network, you can take a TV show from the brink of cancellation to number 2 in its time slot. If you're a movie studio, you can be, if you're 20th Century Fox, you can make Rise of the Planet of the Apes number 1 in the US for 2 weekends in a row. And if you're Brisk Iced Tea, you can create a worldwide trending topic. Now, these are just a few things I've seen influencers capable of doing on some of the campaigns I've worked on. But that said, working with influencers is by no means a guarantee for success. So how do you ensure success? Well, I think there's really 3 key elements that go into a great influencer marketing campaign. And those are, bigger is not always better. It's very easy to be seduced by big numbers, the biggest subscribers, Twitter followers, etc. But that doesn't necessarily make it the right fit. Second, make it their idea. And by it, I mean the brand message. Actually get them pumped on what they're distributing. And thirdly, create a moment in time. There's so much content out there, it's really difficult to stand out. So you really have to focus your efforts. So going back to the first point of bigger is not always better, I think the best way to really bring this to life is through some case studies. And back in 2010, I was working with DKNY. My coffee cup, sorry. I was working with DKNY on the launch of Beatalicious Candy Apple Fragrance. And we sold through an influencer marketing campaign, and we had a bit of a decision. We could go with one of the top 5 fashion, makeup, and beauty gurus, or we could work with a handful of up-and-coming creators. So somebody who was really well known at the time to be in the top 5, it was 200,000 to 150,000. Those days are long gone, obviously. Or about 75% fewer subscribers. And if we'd have just stopped there, obviously it would have made a lot more sense to just go with the recognizable creator, most reach. But we stopped and looked at their average views per video and realized that with 4 niche creators, we were going to get about 15% more views. So we went that route, and the campaign turned out pretty well. We got across the 4 videos, 750,000 video views, 20,000 app submissions to the Facebook app we created. So we were pretty happy. But fast forward about 2 months later, and we were pitching the promotion of another Facebook app that we'd created. Now, we were pitching, let's work with influencers again. We had a lot of success there. They drove a ton of engagement and participation. But there was also the media agency who was recommending, well, hey, we can also get millions of impressions across major media properties. And they were recommending we can be on Oprah and Yahoo and Us Weekly, some really recognizable names. And in this particular case, they ended up going with the let's get a bunch of impressions, let's do the media buy. And how do you think that turned out? Yeah, it didn't translate too well. We got tens of millions of impressions, but only a few hundred new Facebook likes and app participants compared to the original program with the influencers. And I'm not saying this to knock over more traditional media publishers and platforms, but no doubt about it, the influencers were able to deliver on the engagement metric. So that case study is great in that it highlights the importance of the difference between a publisher and an influencer, but what about influencers and the original influencer, celebrities? Going back 2 years earlier in 2008, we worked on a campaign for the launch of Spore. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Spore, but it was a pretty highly anticipated game at the time. It was made by the creator of The Sims, so there was a lot of hype surrounding this. And we sold through a campaign where we were going to get 50 celebrities and digital influencers and give them exclusive access to a portion of the game where they could create their own creature. And we're going to take all these and post them up to this website, and everybody's going to invite their fans to go vote. And we had some pretty heavy hitters. So on the celebrity side of things, you'll see there's Katy Perry, Elijah Wood, there's Mark Cuban, so Richard Branson, huge names. And on the digital influencer side, we had folks like Ayzenberg, Veronica Belmont, the lead editor of Kotaku, which is, I believe, the biggest gaming blog in the world. Now, the results of this were pretty interesting. Does anybody want to take a guess at who ended up winning? Good guess. But it wasn't Ayzenberg. It was close, though. This person was Phil DeFranco, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Phil, but he won by a landslide. He posted one video, and in 24 hours had 100,000 votes, and it just wiped out everybody. It was pretty impressive. And then from there, we had the Ayzenbergs of the world, Kevin Rose, so on and so forth. And then down at the very bottom were the traditional celebrities. And I highlight this case study because it's important to recognize in this case that while we all know these celebrities, their recognition doesn't necessarily translate to true engagement and impact. And also, I think with both these case studies, when you take a step back, it highlights the fact that regardless of what vertical you're working in, gaming, fashion and beauty and so forth, this concept of bigger is not always better applies. And the other point I wanted to highlight was, so now we're at this stage where in this space there's so much hype, and it's being really focused around this core group of influencers, kind of in the very top tier, the top 1% of creators. There's billboards all over New York. I don't know if you guys have seen the Google preferred stuff. People are definitely hobnobbing with celebrities, and it's very cool, but at the same time, supply and demand would dictate that these big, well-known creators, there's only a few of them. And with all the industry recognition, both in entertainment and advertising, everybody's going after the same people. So their prices are going up. But there's a really big opportunity to stop and analyze, why am I working with these people? Are they appropriate for me? Or am I just going after the people that I know? And it's important to recognize the fact that there's tens of thousands of creators out there with over 50,000 subscribers. So there's virtually endless scalable solutions in terms of potential influencers to collaborate with. Not everybody in fashion and beauty necessarily has to go out and work with Michelle Phan to be successful, and not everybody in gaming needs to go out and work with a PewDiePie or a Freddie Wong. So explore, buying low and selling high. It's great to build these relationships very early on. So it's not just enough, though, to work with the right influencers. It's important to work with them in the right way, which brings me to my next point of making it their idea. Now, oftentimes we as advertisers approach collaborating with influencers through the lens of, the traditional production and creative model. This is an opportunity for me to create video content. We're going to art direct and copyright. And that's not the appropriate lens to approach this through. The reason for that being that the relationship that creators have with their fans is much more akin to a friendship. And you saw with, we didn't quite see with the video with Charles. I mean, people are getting a lot of insight into these influencers' daily lives. They feel as if they know them. They know them really intimately. They get to see so many details about how they live. And that's really important to keep in mind. You don't want to, copyright words for these people, because imagine, put yourself in your, imagine if you were going out to lunch with a friend of yours, and you know how your friend talks. They just jump into a sales pitch to you like, hey, did you know you can get this bacon avocado cheeseburger for $9.99 today only? And, don't forget to use the hashtag and also tag me. It would feel really weird. Yeah. Well, unless it's you. But, that's what it feels like when you're, writing words for these people and say, hey, say this. It's like very apparent that that's not what you sound like, and you're basically being a shitty friend. But that said, there's also the inverse of that. You don't necessarily want to go out and, so don't armchair art direct. That's the key takeaway there. That said, obviously you don't want to do the inverse of that. It's, very tempting to be like, here's, go off and do whatever you want. And I trust you. You're going to come back with something amazing. They might, but you could come back, they could come back with something terrible. That's not on brand. And that's happened a lot of times. And, you don't want to end up with something like this. We got music. Sweet. Where you from? You sexy thing, you. I don't quite know what that would work for, but you get the idea. Yeah, that wasn't an actual ad, but it was an example. I've probably seen worse though. So what's that balance? You don't want to just say, hey, do whatever you want. I'm going to trust you. As a brand, you want to get your message across. The influencer wants to do what they want to do because they rely on their audience. So really, you want to hit that sweet spot where everybody wins. And going back to the point earlier about, it's important not to approach this through the lens of, your traditional, creative, art directing, copywriting model, because that's not necessarily what's important in this space. And when you think back to, that case study I referenced earlier with, Spore and Phil DeFranco winning, you're probably thinking, he must have made like this amazing video. He beat Katy Perry and Richard Branson and all these. Mark Cuban was on that list. It was pretty incredible. But to get the message across and for the audience to get excited and for the creator to get excited, this is what we ended up with.
Well, all you have to do is go to sporevote.com, links over here, and vote for me. I'm on the second page. On top of showing Zach and Cody that they don't control the internet, you'll also help me raise $15,000 for PKD Cure, which is a charity for PKD. But the only way we can win is if each and every one of you go to the website and vote. You don't have to sign up. You just have to find me, click a button, and then boom.
Boom. So this got 100,000 votes in 24 hours. So it's important to recognize that, to a certain extent, you are not your audience. This content doesn't necessarily need to look the same way that you perceive other content in advertising having to look. So, obviously community trumps production in this space. However, when you're looking at this case study, it's easy to kind of write it off. It's a video game. They got celebrities. There's all these it's like an exclusive feature that nobody else has. That said, it is possible to get everybody excited without having all this stuff. And I think the way to do this is put yourself in the shoes of the creators. A lot of them are getting, RFPs and emails and phone calls and briefs from faceless names and voices, via email and phone calls. And it's tough to, get excited about a brand just by, reading a brief. So one thing that worked really well was I was working with Bud Light on a campaign, and they wanted to get the up for whatever narrative out there during the Super Bowl. They really wanted to just make it part of the cultural lexicon. And they put themselves in the shoes of the creators. What is going to make somebody with an audience of 25 to 35-year-old guys really excited? And they did a great job. They flew everybody out to New York, and the hotel they were put up at was not just any old hotel. It was the Bud Light Hotel, which was really a retrofitted cruise ship. It was a Norwegian cruise liner. It's pretty incredible. And then they got to go see the Foo Fighters and Imagine Dragons and meet the Workaholics and the bald guy from Anchorman 2. So, it was pretty incredible. So, obviously they're having a good time. It's easy to get excited about that experience. And through it all, they're really living and being immersed in this idea of living in the moment and being spontaneous, which was what Up for Whatever really stood for. And here's a quick clip from one of the videos of one of the influencers that I brought out there, Chase Jarvis. So, Chase usually gets, 100,000 to 200,000 video views. This ended up getting well over 500,000. His audience was super excited. And, the brand was excited. The whole time, by the end of the weekend, everybody was like, yeah, I'm up for whatever. So it really worked well. And I think it's important to keep in mind, what is going to make these people tick? How are you going to get them excited? Which leads me to my third point. So, we've talked about selecting the right influencers, how to collaborate with them in a way where you're going to create something that's actually going to resonate. But it's a crowded space. We've got 500 million tweets each day, 500 million. There's 5 billion pieces of content being posted to Facebook every single day. Every minute, there's over 100 hours of video being uploaded to YouTube. So it's extremely hard to stand out and actually have an impact. Even if you are, doing everything right, you're checking off all the boxes. So what's the solution here? I think the way to approach this is to imagine it in the context of people's feeds. There's a ton of content being shared. They're following their friends, and picture that as like a busy, crowded city street. People are walking down New York. All their friends are talking and sharing, and maybe every once in a while somebody looks up and points at something. You may or may not look, but you're going to follow the majority of your friends as they're moving on down the street. But if you got a good chunk of your friends, you got all your friends to pause, stop, and look up, you would do the same. And not only that, but you would kick off a bit of a snowball effect where everybody else around them will stop and look up. And this is actually pretty cool. There's a bunch of videos of people pulling this prank up on YouTube. I think you should check out. But that same impact that happens in the real world can be applied online. So you really want to start this snowball effect. Create a surround sound echo chamber around all your target and focus your efforts so that they all stop together and look at what you're pointing to. A great example of this, in practice was back in 2011, was working with 20th Century Fox Fault Mechanism, and we were working on the promotion of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Now for that, we identified 50 influencers that were relevant to the target. We were trying to introduce the franchise to a whole new generation. So we brought all these YouTubers to LA. They got to meet the writers, directors, producers. They got to see the whole marketing campaign before it went live. And then every time each video that we had created was getting rolled out, we focused our efforts. We gave 10 to 20 of the influencers the videos like a week in advance, told them what day it was going live, and asked them to prep their content and their message in advance. And then when that day came around, the video went live. We launched the paid media, all the influencers, and really focused our efforts. And it kicked off a wave of sharing. And a number of these videos did quite well. One of them ended up being the third most shared ad of that year, Ape with AK-47. I don't know if you guys have seen that. The 7 videos in aggregate generated about 70 million views. So it performed really well. It kicked off that snowball effect of actual sharing. So to recap, it's very easy to think about things in terms of the context of a campaign. Like, I want to stretch out a campaign over 6 months, but if you don't focus your efforts, you're not necessarily going to actually be able to cut through all this noise out there and have a real tangible impact. So to recap, the key takeaways, bigger is not always better. There's a real opportunity to think about this space very analytically. Why am I selecting these people? And in doing so, you can be the brave person who's like, no, we're going to beat Katy Perry by working with this up-and-coming YouTuber. And you've got a lot of opportunities here to work with people with really engaged communities. Let your competitors be star fuckers and work with people and overpay for the same audience. Make it their idea. Put yourself in the shoes of the creators. Like I said, they're getting a ton of RFPs. They're dealing with a lot of people. What can you do so they can actually get excited? Create an experience for them. And thirdly, create a moment in time. Remember, it's easy in a boardroom to think about everything like, oh, well, yeah, it'll map out like this, but that's, a media chart does not translate to the real world and the way people consume content. And you've got to really focus your efforts, create this surround sound effect, and just kind of bombard people with ideally a really positive message to get them to start sharing. And this approach I recommend because ultimately at the end of the day, it forces you to think about why you're doing something and not just go through the motions and kind of rest on your laurels. And YouTube is nearly a decade old now. So it's not just going to be beneficial with this audience and these influencers, but will also help you translate. It'll also translate to other platforms and allow you to think analytically and strategically in those platforms as well. So with that, thank you very much. Cool.
Any questions for Brendan? You guys want to tackle?
Any questions?
I think you hit on something that's reoccurring about creating a moment in time.
Yeah.
There seems to be 2 different debates going on. There's one of a cadence, right? Elongating these influencers versus stacking and creating a synergy around that. And not only in just all media planning, but also the influencer stacking in there. Is that because, is one influencer, is it trying to get many to work together, not to try to surround audiences in different areas, or is it, why are you saying, why the stacking moment for you?
Well, I know, well, for me personally, at this point, your social media feed is so packed with stuff. I don't even click on anything unless I see 10 people share it already. So, with all the viral videos, it's really got to be something that I see again and again and again that indicates to me, oh, this is something worthwhile and this is worth my time. So I think creating that kind of echo chamber is really critical. If you spread it out across too many different audiences, you aren't reinforcing the message.
Okay.
Just to go off the last slide that you had, what do you think is next?
Oh, well, I
told you had to come in with a final coup de grace.
Yeah.
You are a Forbes 30 under 30 prognosticator, Brendan. What do we got?
Oh, God.
What stock am I buying?
Well, I don't think it's about what's next. I think it's like what's already now. I mean, and that sounds super cheesy, but it's true. It's like already, Zach was up here. Vine is already massive. The Instagram influencers, that's massive. And we tend to think in terms of like, oh, YouTube, this is a new space. It's like totally not a new space. It's 10 years old. So this is not a new space, just in the same way I think Vine is not new and Instagram is not new. We tend to tell ourselves, I think, as advertisers, like, oh, that's way off in the distance. But I think it's important to ground ourselves in the reality that it's not. It's actually right now and it's happening.
Okay. Anything else, folks? Cool. Thanks,
Sweet.
Brendan. Rock and roll, man. Thank you, my friend.